Alright, so we're gonna be back in the Morrowind, doing the Morrowind thing. Alright, so from last time, if you'll remember, we just finished plundering what we could of the Corpusarium and are now ready to report back to David Fear, the Telvanni Mage Lord. And I think we've opened all of the ornate Dwemer chests that we can.
Just figure a scheme of classifying manifolds for triply connected surfaces, or even more complex surfaces.
Or we could read these books, which is what we're gonna do. Okay, so...
Help!
Ah, shit. Nope. I guess we can't read them from inside. Is there a way to read them at all? Okay. Azura in the Box. Ancient Tales of the Dwemer. Part 9 by Marbar Sul. Nikshilbar had enjoyed an adventurous youth, but had grown to be a very wise, very old Dwemer, who spent his life searching for the truth and dispelling superstitions. He invented much and created many theorems and logic structures that bore his name, but much of the world still puzzled him, and nothing was a greater enigma to him than the nature of the Aedra and Daedra. Over the course of his research, he came to the conclusion that many of the gods were entirely fabricated by man and Mer. Nothing, however, was a greater question to Nikilbar than the limits of divine power. Were the greater beings the masters of the entire world, or did the humbler creatures have the strength to forge their own destinies? As Nikilbar found himself nearing the end of his life, he felt he must understand this last basic truth. Among the sage's acquaintances was a holy Chimmer priest named Athnic. When the priest was visiting Witlag Zutramaz, Nikbar told Nichlibar told him what he intended to do to find the nature of divine power. Athnic was terrified and pleaded with his friend not to break this great mystery, but Nikbar was resolute. Finally, the priest agreed to assist out of love for his friend, though he feared the results of this blasphemy. Athnic summoned Azura. After the usual rituals by which the priest declared his faith in her powers and Azura agreed to do no harm to him, Nikilbar and a dozen of his students entered the summoning chamber, carrying with them a large box. As we see you in our land, Azura, you are the goddess of the dusk and dawn, and all the mysteries therein, said Nikilbar, trying to appear as kindly and obsequious as he could be. It is said that your knowledge is absolute. So it is, smiled the Daedra. You would know, for example, what is in this wooden box, said Nikilbar. Obsequious also means obedient or attentive to an excessive or servile degree. Azura turned to Athnic, her brow furrowed. The priest was quick to explain. Goddess, this Dwemer is a very wise and respected man. Believe me, please. The intention is not to mock your greatness, but to demonstrate it to this scientist and to the rest of his skeptical race. I have tried to explain your power to him, but his philosophy is such that he must see it demonstrated. If I am to demonstrate my might in a way to bring the Dwemer race to my understanding, it might have been a more impressive feat you would have me do, growled Azura, and turned to look Nikilbar in the eyes. There is a red petaled flower in the box. Nicobar did not smile or frown. He simply opened the box and revealed to all that it was empty. When the students turned to look to Azura, she was gone. Only Athnic had seen the goddess's expression before she vanished, and he could not speak. He was trembling so. A curse had fallen, he knew that truly, but even crueler was the knowledge of divine power that had been demonstrated. Nicobar also looked pale, uncertain on his feet, but his face shone not with fear, but bliss. The smile of a Dwemer finding evidence for a truth only suspected. 2 of his students supported him, and 2 more supported the priest as they left the chamber. I have studied very much over the years, performed countless experiments, taught myself 1,000 languages, and yet the skill that has taught me the final truth is the one that I learned when I was but a poor young man, trying only to have enough gold to eat, whispered the sage. As he was escorted up the stairs to his bed, a red flower petal fell from the sleeve of his voluminous robe. Nicobar died that night, a portrait of peace that comes from contented knowledge. Publisher's note. This is another tale whose origin is unmistakably Dwemer. Again, the words of some Aldmeris translations are quite different, but the essence of the story is the same. The Dwemer have a similar tale about Nicobar, but in the Dwemer version, Azura recognizes the trick and refuses to answer the question. She slays the Dwemer present for their skepticisms and curses the Dwemer for blasphemy. In the Almeris version, Azura is tricked not by an empty box, but by a box containing a sphere, which somehow becomes a flat square. Interesting. Aldmeri being a different continent, I suppose? Or Aldmer? Is that Somerset Isle? Is that High Elves? I think it might be. The Aldmer. Of course, the Aldmeris version, being a few steps closer to the original Dwemer, are much more difficult to understand. Perhaps this stage magic explanation was added by Gore Fulham because of Fulham's own experience with such tricks in his plays when a mage was not available. Marbar Sul left even the character of Nicobar alone, and he represents many Dwemer virtues. His skepticism, while not nearly as absolute as in the Almeris version, is celebrated even though it brings a curse upon the Dwemer and the unnamed House of the Poor Priest. Whatever the true nature of the gods, and how right or wrong the Dwemer were about them, this tale might explain why the dwarves vanished from the face of Tamriel, though Nicobar and his kind may not have intended to mock the Aedra and Daedra. Their skepticism certainly offended the divine orders. Okay. So again, we see Azura showing up here pretty prominently. Let's see, the Dowry. Ancient Tales of the Dwemer, Part 10 by Marbar Sul. Oh, all of these are by Marbar Sul, actually. Yanele was the wealthiest landowner in Gunal, and he had over the years saved a tremendous dowry for the man who would marry his daughter, Ginefra. When she reached the age of consent, he locked the gold away for safekeeping and announced his intention to have her marry. She was a comely lass, a scholar, a great athlete, but dour and brooding in aspect. This personality defect did not bother her potential suitors any more than her positive traits impressed them. Every man knew the tremendous wealth that would be his as the husband of Ginefra and son-in-law of Yenele. That alone was enough for hundreds to come to Gunal to pay court. The man who will marry my daughter, said Yenale to the assembled, must not be doing so purely out of avarice, but he must demonstrate his own wealth to my satisfaction. This simple pronouncement removed a vast majority of the suitors who knew they could not impress the landowner with their meager fortunes. A few dozen did come forward within a few days, clad in fine Kilric cloth of spun silver, accompanied by exotic servants traveling in magnificent carriages. Of all who came, who met with Yenale's approval, none arrived in a more resplendent fashion than Waylin Nairlick. Nairlick. The young man, who no one had ever heard of, arrived in a shining ebon coach drawn by a team of dragons. Okay. His clothing of rarest manufacture and accompanied by an army of the most fantastical servants any of Gunal had ever seen, valets with eyes on all sides of their heads, maidservants that seemed cast in gemstones. But such was not enough with Yenale. The man who marries my daughter must prove himself an intelligent fellow. So this is a Dwemer tale, I suppose. So, valets with eyes on all sides of their heads and maidservants that seemed cast in gemstones. So I guess they're mechanical. Dwemer stories may basically say things that would be impossible for biological beings to have, but in Dwemer tales, it's kind of assumed that a lot of these are automatons, or they just reference them like it's common knowledge that many of these would be mechanical servants. The man who marries my daughter must prove himself an intelligent fellow, for I would not have an ignoramus as a son-in-law and business partner, he declared. This eliminated a large part of the wealthy suitors who, though their lives of luxury, had never needed to think very much, if at all. Still, some came forward over the next few days, demonstrating their wit and learning, quoting the great sages of the past, and offering their philosophies of metaphysics and alchemy. Waylin Nairlick, too, came and asked Yenale to dine at the villa he had rented outside of Gunal. There, the landowner saw scores of scribes working on translations of Aldmeri tracts, and enjoyed the young man's somewhat irreverent but intriguing intelligence. Nevertheless, though he was much impressed with Waylin Nairlick, Yenale had another challenge. I love my daughter very much, said Yenale, and I hope that the man who marries her will make her happy as well. Should any of you make her smile, she and the great dowry are yours. The suitors lined up for days, singing her songs, proclaiming their devotion, describing her beauty in the most poetic of terms. Yennefer merely glared at all with hatred and melancholia. Same. Yenale, who stood by her side, began to despair at last. His daughter's suitors were failing to a man at this task. Finally, Waylin Nairlick came to the chamber. I will make your daughter smile, he said. I dare say I'll make her laugh. But only after you've agreed to marry us. If she is not delighted within 1 hour of our engagement, the wedding can be called off. Yenale turned to his daughter. She was not smiling, but her eyes had sparkled with some morbid curiosity in this young man. As no other suitor had even registered that for her, he agreed. The dowry is naturally not to be paid till after you've wed, said Yenale. Being engaged is not enough. Might I see the dowry still? Asked Waylin. Knowing how fabled the treasure was, and understanding that this would likely be the closest the young man would come to possessing it, Yenale agreed. He had grown quite fond of Waylin. On his orders, Waylin, Yenale, Glum, Genefra, and the Castilian delved deep into the stronghold of Gunal. The first vault had to be opened by touching a series of runic symbols. Should one of the marks be mispressed, a volley of poisoned arrows would have struck the thief. Yenale was particularly proud of the next level of security, a lock composed of blades with 18 tumblers. required 3 keys to be turned simultaneously to allow entry. The blades were designed to eviscerate any who merely picked one of the locks. Finally, they reached the storeroom. It was entirely empty. "By Lorcan, we've been burgled," cried Yunlei. "But how? Who could have done this?" "A humble, but, if I may say so, rather talented burglar," said Wayland. "A man who has loved your daughter from afar for many years, but did not possess the glamour or the learning to impress. That is, until the gold from her dowry afforded me the opportunity." "You," bellowed Yunlei, scarcely able to believe it. Then something even more unbelievable happened. Yennefer began to laugh. She had never even dreamed of meeting anyone like this thief. She threw herself into his arms before her father's outraged eyes. After a moment, Yunlei too began to laugh. Yennefer and Wayland were married in a month's time. Though he was in fact quite poor and had little scholarship, Yunlei was amazed how much his wealth increased with such a son-in-law and business partner. He only made certain never to ask whence came the excess gold. Publisher's note: the tale of a man trying to win the hand of a maiden whose father, usually a wealthy man or king, tests each suitor is quite common. See, for instance, the more recent 4 Suitors of Benita, which we did. Benita. We actually have read that book by Joel Yovles. The behavior of the characters is quite out of character for the Dwemer. No one today knows their marriage customs or even if they had marriage at all. One rather odd theory of the disappearance of the dwarves came from this and a few other tales of Morrowind Rebirth. It was proposed that the Dwemer never in fact left. They did not depart Nirn, much less the continent of Tamriel, and they are still among us, disguised. These scholars use the story of Azura and the box to suggest that the Dwemer feared Azura, a being they could neither understand nor control, and they adopted the dress and manner of Chimmer and Altmer in order to hide from Azura's gaze. So Chimer is the term of the Dunmer before they were cursed by Azura to be dark elves, and the Altmer are, of course, the high elves. This explanation is very favorable to the elves themselves, and especially to pious elves who honor the gods and goddesses, especially of Azura. I personally don't really think that that's very likely, but okay. Song of the Alchemists. The Song of the Alchemists, Ancient Tales of the Dwemer, Part 5 by Morrowind. When King Merainon's alchemist had to leave his station after a laboratory experiment that yielded detonation, the word went out that the king did want a new servant to mix his potions and brews. Oh, we've read this before. But he declared he would only choose a fellow who knew the tricks and the tools. The king refused to hire on more fools. After much deliberation, discussions, and debates, the king picked 2 well-learned candidates in Ianthropus Minthurk and Emphatic Fair. An ambitious pair vied to prove which one was the best. Said the king, there will be a test. They went to the large chamber with herbs, gems, and tomes, pots, measuring cups, all under high crystalline domes. Make me a tonic that will make me invisible, laughed the king in a tone some would call risible. So Emphatic Fear and Ithanopus Minthurk began to work, mincing herbs, mashing metal, refining strange oils, cautiously setting their cauldrons to burbling boils, each on his own, sending mixing bowls mixing, sometimes peeking to see what the other was fixing. After they had worked for nearly 3/4 an hour, both Athanopus Minthurk and Emphatic Fear winked at each other, certain he had won. Said the king Merainon, now you must taste the potions you've wrought. Take a spoon and sample it right from your pot. Minthurk vanished with his lips touched his brew, but Fear tasted his and remained apparent in view. You think you mix silver, blue diamonds, and yellow grass, the king laughed. Look up, Fear, up to the ceiling glass. The light falling makes the ingredients you choose quite different hues. What do you get? Asked the floating voice bold. Of a potion of red diamonds, blue grass, and gold. By Dwemer God, said Fear, his face in a wince, I've made a potion to fortify my own intelligence. Publisher's note. This poetry is so clearly in the style of Gorflim that it rarely does not need any commentary. I believe when I read this previously, I remarked that this is a very a common academic failing, is assuming that the person reading it knows as much as you do, and so you don't have to explain it. Note the simple rhyming scheme of AABBCC, the sing-song but purposefully clumsy meter, and the recurring jokes at the obviously absurd names Emphatic Fear and Athanapism Thurk. The final joke that the stupid alchemist invents a potion to make himself smarter by pure accident would have appealed to the anti-intellectualism of audiences in the interregnum period? Yeah, interregnum period, but would certainly be rejected by the Dwemer. Note that even Marabar Sul refuses to name any Dwemer gods. The Dwemer religion, if it can even be called that, is one of the most complex and difficult puzzles of their culture. Over the millennia, the song became a popular tavern song in High Rock, which is the Breton homeland, before eventually disappearing from everything but scholarly books, much like the Dwemer themselves. Okay, the importance of wear. Blunt weapon increased to 6. The Importance of Wear, Ancient Tales of the Dwemer, Part 3 by Marabar Sul. The chieftain Orthrobar gathered his wise men together and said, Every morning a tenfold of my flock are found butchered. What is the cause? Fengbith, the war leader, said, A monster may be coming down from the mountain and devouring your flock. Gorik, the healer, said, A strange new disease perhaps is to blame. Baron, the priest, said, We must sacrifice to the goddess for her to save us. Wise men made sacrifices while they waited for their answers from the goddess. Bangbith went to mentor Joltreg and said, You taught me well how to forge the cudgel of Zolia, and how to wield it in combat. But I must know now when it is wise to use my skill. Do I wait for the goddess to reply, or the medicine to work? Or do I hunt the monster which I know is in the mountain? When it is not important, said Joltreg, where is all that is important? So Fangbith took his Zolik cudgel in hand and walked far through the dark forest until he came to the base of the great mountain. There he met 2 monsters, one bloodied with the flesh of the chieftain of Orthobar's flock. One bloodied with the flesh of the chieftain of Orthobar's flock fought him while its mate fled. I wonder if that's a mistranslation or if that's an editing mistake. The chieftain of Orthobar's flock. Interesting. Bangbith remembered what his master had taught him, that wear was all that was important. He struck the monster on each of its 5 vital points, head, groin, throat, back, and chest. 5 blows to the 5 points, and the monster was slain. It was too heavy to carry with him, but still triumphant, Fangbith returned to Orthobar. I say I have slain the monster that ate your flock, he cried. What proof have you that you have slain any monster? Asked the chieftain. I say I have saved the flock with my medicine, said Gorik the healer. I say the goddess had saved the flock by my sacrifices, said Baron the priest. 2 mornings went by and the flocks were safe, but on the morning of the 3rd day, another tenfold of the chieftain's flock was found butchered. Gorik the healer went to his study to find a new medicine. Therein the priest prepared more sacrifices. Fangbeth took his Zolik cudgel in hand again and walked far through the dark forest until he came to the base of the great mountain. There he met the other monster, bloodied with the flesh of the chieftain of Orthabar's flock. Oh, the chieftain of Orthabar is the possessive, and flock is the noun, or the subject of the sentence. They did battle, and again Fangbeth remembered what his master had taught him, that where was all that was important. He struck the monster 5 times on the head, and it fled, chasing it along the mountain. He struck it 5 times in the groin, and it fled, running through the forest. Fangbeth overtook the monster and struck it 5 times in the throat, and it fled, entering into the fields of Orthabar. Fangbeth overtook the monster and struck it 5 times in the back, and it fled. At the foot of the stronghold, the chieftain and his wise men emerged to the sound of the monster wailing. There they beheld the monster that had slain the chieftain's flock. Fangbeth struck the monster 5 times in the chest, and it was slain. A great feast was held in Fangbeth's honor, and the flock of Orthabar was never again slain. Joltrig embraced his student and said, "You have at last learned the importance of where you strike your blows." Very good. Very good play on words. Publisher's note. This tale is another which has an obvious origin among the Ashlander tribes of Vardenfell, and is one of their oldest tales. Marbar Sul merely changed the names of the character to sound more dwarven, and resold it as part of his collection. The Great Mountain in this tale is clearly Red Mountain, despite its description of being forested. The starfall and later eruptions destroyed the vegetation on Red Mountain, giving it the wasted appearance it has today. Starfall, interesting. I haven't heard that mentioned before. This tale does have some scholarly interest, as it suggests a primitive Ashlander culture, but it talks of living in strongholds, much like the ruined strongholds on Vardenfell today. Yeah, the Velothi strongholds. There are even references to a stronghold of Orthabar, somewhere between Vardenfell and Skyrim. But few strongholds outside of sparsely settled Vardenfell have survived to the present. Scholars do not agree on who built these strongholds or when, but I believe it is clear from the story and other evidence that the Ashlander tribes used these strongholds in the ancient past instead of making camps of wick-wheat huts as they do today. The play on words that forms the lesson of the fable, that it is as important to know where the monster should be slain at the stronghold as it is to know where the monster must be struck on its body to be slain, is typical of many Ashlander tales. Riddles, even ones as simple as this one, are loved by both the Ashlanders and the vanished Dwemer, although the Dwemer are usually portrayed as presenting the riddles, rather than being the ones who solve it, as in Ashlander tales. Interesting. Yeah, the riddles are good. I really enjoy fantasy riddles. Okay. Ransom of Zarek, Ancient Tales of the Dwemer, Part 1, by Marbar Sul. Jaemanil stood in her garden and read the letter her servant had brought to her. The bouquet of joss roses in her hand fell to the ground. For a moment it was as if all birds had ceased to sing and a cloud had passed over the sky. Her carefully cultivated and structured haven seemed to flood over with darkness. "We have thy son," it read. "We will be in touch with thee shortly with our ransom demands." Zarek had never made it as far as Akgun, after all. One of the brigands on the road, orcs probably, or a cursed Dunmer, must have seen his well-appointed carriage and taken him hostage. Jaelmil clutched at a post for support, wondering if her boy had been hurt. But he was a student, not the sort to fight against well-armed men. But had they beaten him? Oh. He was but a student, not the sort to fight against well-armed men. But had they beaten him? It was more than a mother's heart could bear to imagine. "Don't tell me they sent the ransom note so quickly," called a family voice, and a familiar face appeared through the hedge. It was Zarek. Jamil hurried to embrace her boy, tears running down her face. "What happened?" she cried. "I thought thou had been kidnapped." "I was," said Zarek. 3 huge soaring Nords attacked by carriage on the Frimvorn Pass. Brothers, as I learned, named Matthias, Uln, and Kurg. Thou should have seen these men, mother. Each one of them would have had trouble fitting through the front door, I can tell thee." "What happened?" Jamil repeated. "Were thou rescued?" "I thought about waiting for that, but I knew they'd send off a ransom note, and I know how thou dost worry. So I remembered that my mentor at Akon always said about remaining calm, observing thy surroundings, and looking for thy opponent's weaknesses." Zarek grinned. "It took a while, though, because these fellows were truly monsters. And then, when I listened to them bragging to one another, I realized that vanity was their weakness." "What did thou do?" "They had me chained at their camp in the woods not far from Kale, on a high knoll overlooking a wide river. I heard one of them, Korg, telling the others that it would take the better part of an hour to swim across the river and back. They were nodding in agreement when I spoke up. "I could swim that river and back in 30 minutes, I said. "Impossible," said Korg. "I can swim faster than a little whelp like thee." So it was agreed that we would dive off the cliff, swim to the center island, and return. As we went to our respective rocks, Korg took it upon himself to lecture me about all the fine points of swimming, the importance of synchronized movements of the arms and legs for maximum speed, how essential it was to breathe after only third or fourth stroke, not too often to slow thyself down, but not too often to lose one's air. I nodded and agreed to all his fine points. Then we dove off the cliffs. I made it to the island and back in a little over an hour, but Korg never returned. He had dashed his brains at the rocks at the base of the cliff. I had noticed the telltale undulations of underwater rocks and had taken the diving rock on the right. "Wow. But thou returned?" asked Jamil, astounded. "Was that not then when thou escaped?" "It was too risky to escape then," said Zarek. "They could have easily caught me again, and I wasn't keen to be blamed for Korg's disappearance. I said I did not know what happened to him, and after some searching, they decided he had forgotten about the race and had swum ashore to hunt for food. He could not see how I could have had anything to do with his disappearance. As fully visible as I was throughout my swim, the two brothers began making camp along the rocky cliff edge, picking an ideal location so that I would not be able to escape. One of the brothers, Matthias, began commenting on the quality of the soil and the gradual incline of the rock that circled around the bay below. Ideal, he said, for a foot race. I expressed my ignorance of the sport, and he was keen to give me details of the proper technique for running a race. He made absurd faces, showing how one must breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth, how to bend one's knees to the proper angle on the rise, the importance of sure foot placement. Most important, he explained, was that the runner keep an aggressive but not too strenuous pace if one intends to win. It is fine to run in second place through the race, he said, provided one has the willpower and strength to pull out in the end. I was an enthusiastic student, and Matthias decided that we ought to run a quick race around the edge of the bay before night fell. Olin told us to bring back some firewood when we came back. We began at once down the path skirting the cliff below. I followed his advice about breath, gait, and foot placement, but I ran with all my power right from the start. Despite his much longer legs, I was a few paces ahead as we wound the first corner. With his eyes on my back, Matthias did not see the gape in the rock that I jumped over. He plummeted over the cliff before he had a chance to cry out. I spent a few minutes gathering up some twigs before I returned to Ulan at the camp. Now, that were just showing off, frowned Jimiel. Surely that would have been a good time to escape. Thou might think so, agreed Zarek, but thou had to see the topography. A few large trees and then nothing but shrubs. Owen would have noticed my absence and caught up with me in no time, and I would have had a hard time explaining Matthias's absence. However, the brief forage around the area allowed me to observe some of the trees close up, and I could formulate my final plan. When I got back to camp with a few twigs, I told Owen that Matthias was slow coming along, dragging a large dead tree behind him. Owen scoffed at his brother's strength, saying it would take him time to pull up a live tree by the roots and drop it on the bonfire. I expressed reasonable doubt. I'll show thee. See, there's something about the phrasing. One scoffed at his brother's strength, saying it would take him time to pull up a live tree by the roots and drop it on the bonfire. So the brother would take more time to pull up a live tree and drop it on the bonfire, but we already said that the large tree was dead behind him. I wonder if this is a writing thing or if this is just an indicator of how ancient these stories are and going through multiple translations, or maybe even the translator themselves having problems translating the language. I'll show thee, he said, ripping up a 10-foot-tall specimen effortlessly. But that's scarcely a sapling, I objected. I thought you could rip up a tree. His eyes followed mine to a magnificent, heavy-looking one at the edge of the clearing. Owen grabbed it and began to shake it with a tremendous force to loosen its roots from the dirt. With that, he loosened the hive from the uppermost branches, dropping it down onto his head. That was when I made my escape, mother, said Zarek in conclusion, showing a little schoolboy pride. While Matthias and Krug were at the base of the cliff, and was flailing about, engulfed by a swarm. Camille embraced her son once again. Publisher's note. I was reluctant to publish the works of Marbar Sul, but when the University of Gwynlyn Press asked me to edit this edition, I decided to use this as an opportunity to set the record straight once and for all. Scholars do not agree on the exact date of Marbar Sul's work, but it is generally agreed that they were written by the playwright Gore Flem, famous for popular comedies and romances during the interregnum period, between the fall of the First Cyrodiilic Empire and the rise of Tiber Septim. The current theory holds that Flem heard a few genuine Dwemer tales and adapted them to the stage in order to make money, along with the rewritten versions of many of his own plays. Flem created the persona of Marbar Sul, who could translate the Dwemer language in order to add some sort of validity to the work and make it even more valuable to the gullible. Interesting. You could translate the Dwemer language, the persona who could translate the Dwemer language in order to add some sort of validity to the work and make it even more valuable to the gullible. Note that while Marbar Sul and his works became the subject of heated controversy, there are no reliable records of anyone actually meeting Marbar Sul, nor was there anyone of that name employed by the Mages Guild, the School of Julianos, or any other intellectual institution. In any case, the Dwemer in most of the tales of Marbar Sul bear little resemblance to the fearsome, unfathomable race that frightened even the Dunmer, Nords, and Redguards into submission and built ruins that even now have yet to be understood. Okay, interesting publisher's note. Now, Acts 7. The Seed. Ancient Tales of the Dwemer Part 2 by Marbar Sul. The hamlet village of Lork was a quiet, peaceful Dwemer community nestled in the monochrome gray and tan dunes and boulders of the Dejaste. Sorry, I'm gonna get some water. Okay. No vegetation of any kind grew in Lork, though there were blackened vestiges of long dead trees scattered throughout the town. Hamida, arriving by caravan, looked at her new home with despair. She was used to the forest land of the north, where her father's family had hailed. Here there was no shade, little water, and a great open sky. It looked like a dead land. Her mother's family took Kemdida and her younger brother Nevith in and was very kind to the orphans, but she felt lonely in the alien village. It was not until she met an old Argonian woman who worked at the water factory that Kemdida found a friend. Her name was Sigrith, and she said that her family had lived in Lorik centuries before the Dwemer arrived, when it was a great and beauteous forest. Why did the trees die? Asked Kemdida. When there were Argonians only in this land, we never cut trees, for we had no need for fuel or wooden structures such as you use. When the Dwemer came, we allowed them to use the plants as they needed them, provided they never touched the hist, which are sacred to us and to the land. For many years, we lived peaceably. No one wanted for anything. What happened? Some of your scientists discovered that distilling a certain tree sap, molding it, and drying it, they could create a resilient kind of armor called resin, said Sigrith. Most of the trees that grew here had very thin ichor in their branches, but not the hist. Many of them fairly glistened with sap, which made the Dwemer merchants greedy. They hired a woodsman named Junin to start clearing the sacred arbors for profit. The old Argonian woman looked to the dusty ground and sighed. Of course, we Argonians cried out against it. It was our home, and the hist once gone would never return. The merchants reconsidered, but Junin took it on his own to break our spirit. He proved one terrible, bloody day that his prodigious skill with the axe could be used against people as well as trees. Any Argonian who stood in his way was hewn asunder, children as well. The Dwemer people of Lorik closed their doors and their ears to the cries of murder. Horrible, gasped Kemdida. It is difficult to explain, said Sigrith, but the deaths of our living ones was not nearly as horrible to us as the death of our trees. You must understand that to my people, the hist are where we come from and where we are going. To destroy our bodies is nothing. To destroy our trees is to annihilate us entirely, or utterly. When Junin then turned his axe on the hist, he killed the land. The water disappeared, the animals died, and all the other life that the trees nourished crumbled and dried to dust. "But you are still here," asked Candida. "Why didn't you leave?" "For us, we are trapped. I am one of the last of a dying people. Few of us are strong enough to live away from our ancestral groves, and sometimes, even now, there is a perfume in the air of Lorik that gives us life. It will not be long until we are all gone." Candida felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Then I will be alone in this horrible place with no trees and no friends." "We Argonians have an expression," said Sigrid with a sad smile, taking Candida's hand, "that the best soil for a seed is found in your heart." Candida looked into the palm of her hand and saw that Sigrid had given her a small black pellet. It was a seed. "It looks dead." "It can only grow in one place in all of Lorik," said the old Argonian, "outside an old cottage in the hills outside town. I cannot go there, for the owner would kill me on sight, and like all my people, I am too frail to defend myself." Wow, that's pretty racist. "Like all my people, I am too frail to defend myself now. But you can go there and plant the seed." "What will happen?" asked Candida. "Will the Hist return?" "No, but some part of their power will." That night, Candida stole from her house and into the hills. She knew the cottage Sigrid had spoken of. Her aunt and uncle had told her never to go there. As she approached it, the door opened and an old but powerfully built man appeared, a mighty axe slung over his shoulder. "What are you doing here, child?" he demanded. "In the dark, I almost took you to be a lizard man." "I've lost my way in the dark," she said quickly. "I'm trying to get back to my home in Lorik." "Be on your way then." "Do you have a candle I might have?" she asked piteously. "I've been walking in circles, and I'm afraid I'll only return back here without any light." The old man grumbled and walked into his house. Quickly, Candida dug a hole in the dry dirt and buried the seed as deeply as she could. He returned with a lit candle. "See to it you don't come back here," he growled, "or I'll chop you in half." He returned to his house and fire. The next morning, when he awoke and opened the door, he found that his cottage was entirely sealed within an enormous tree. He picked up his axe and delivered blow after blow to the wood, but he could never break through. He tried side chops, but the wood healed itself. He tried an upper chop, followed by an under chop, to form a wedge, but the wood sealed. Much time went by before someone discovered old Duhin's emaciated body lying in front of his open door, still holding his blunted, broken axe. It was a mystery to all what he had been chopping with it, but the legend began circulating through Lorkith that his sap was found on the blade. Shortly thereafter, small desert flowers began pushing through the dry dirt in the town. Trees and plants newly sown began to live tolerably well, if not luxuriantly. The Hist did not return, but Candida and the people of Lorkth noticed that at certain time, around twilight, long, wide shadows of great bygone trees would fill the streets and hills. Interesting. So, he found that his cottage was entirely sealed with an enormous tree. He picked up his axe and delivered blow after blow to the wood, but he could never break through. He tried an upper chop followed by an under chop to form a wedge, but the wood sealed. Much time went by before someone discovered old Yuhun's emaciated body lying in front of his open door, still holding his blunted, broken axe. It was a mystery to all what he had been chopping with it, but the legend began circulating through Lork that his sap was found on the blade. Okay, so it was illusory, maybe? Like the Argonians' illusion specialty? Okay, publisher's note. The Seed is one of Marbar Sul's tales whose origins are well known. This tale originated from the Argonian slaves of southern Morrowind. Marbar Sul merely replaced the Dwemer with Dwemer and claimed he found it in a Dwemer ruin. Furthermore, he later claimed that the Argonian version of this tale was merely a retelling of his original. Wow, so completely unscrupulous. Lorik, while clearly not a Dwemer name, simply does not exist, and in fact, Lorik was a name commonly used incorrectly for Dunmer men in Gore Film's plays. Huh, interesting. The Argonian versions of the story usually take place on Vardenfell, usually in the Telvanni city of Sadrith Mora. Of course, the so-called scholars of Temple Zero will probably claim this story has something to do with Lorcan, simply because the town starts with the letter L. Amazing. All right. Wow. Oh, I gotta say, these are really great. Put them back and see if they get mad at us for reading them. Okay, I think that's all of them.
Grab her!
Okay, it didn't matter. All right, well, that was pretty good. Really enjoyed that. But that again was 4 books, and it pretty much takes us to the limits of one episode that I'm trying to keep to about an hour. So we're just gonna get finally out of the Corpsarium, and then I think we will start the next episode with actually wow, pest. Okay, I think that'll do it for today. Thank you guys very much, and I will see you later.